Hey guys, tonight we step into the shadows of history, but this time not in the castles of kings, nor in the blood-soaked courts of medieval monarchs. Tonight we descend into the mist-drenched streets of London, into a world where betrayal and death were as common as the gaslight that flickered in the fog. This is not the tale of a king or a general, but of a man who saw everything. A man whose mind cut sharper than any blade, whose deductions pierced deeper than any sword. His name was Sherlock Holmes. Close your eyes and picture it. The year is 1895. The city of London does not sleep. Carriages rattle down wet cobblestones, their iron wheels echoing like distant drums of war. The air is thick with smoke and fog, the River Thames crawling like a black serpent through the city's underbelly. Somewhere in this labyrinth of alleys and whispers, crime waits. It always does. And at the very center of this eternal war between order and chaos sits a man in his armchair at 221B Baker Street, lost in thought, violin resting against his knee, smoke curling from the pipe in his hand. Holmes was not a man like others. To many he was cold, detached, even inhuman at times. To others he was the greatest detective alive. But to those who truly knew him, he was something far darker, something more dangerous. He was a man who carried the weight of truth itself, a man for whom every lie was a thread waiting to be pulled, every secret a door waiting to be broken open. And as you listen tonight, remember this: the deeper a man peers into shadows, the more likely the shadows begin to peer back. But of course, no story of Holmes would ever be complete without the steady hand and the loyal voice of the man who told his tale, Dr. John Watson. Once a soldier in Afghanistan, scarred in body and spirit, now a man forever tied to the strange genius of Baker Street. If Holmes was the blade, then Watson was the shield. If Holmes dissected the darkness of men's minds, then Watson bore witness to the human cost of it all. Without Watson's pen, Holmes would have been nothing but a whisper on the streets of London. Together, they were not merely detective and companion. They were a force of balance in a city drowning in secrets. And yet, tonight's story is no ordinary case. Tonight's story is not about a missing jewel or a blackmailer in the fog, or a body found in a locked room. No, tonight's story is about the one case that both Holmes and Watson would come to call their most dangerous, the one that nearly broke them, a case steeped in betrayal, blood, and the kind of darkness that feels older than London itself, a case so haunting, so perilous, that when Watson finally wrote of it, he admitted, "If truth be told, I would rather have died on the battlefield of my wand than walked once more in the footsteps of that night." So settle in. Let the shadows draw close around you, because what you are about to hear is not just a detective story. It is a descent into London's hidden underworld, into the minds of men who would kill and betray for power, into the very heart of fear itself. And like all journeys into darkness, it begins quietly, with a knock at the door of Baker Street. The sound echoed like fate itself. 3 raps, sharp against the wood. Holmes did not rise immediately. He sat in his chair, the violin still silent at his side, his eyes half closed as though he had already solved the mystery of whoever stood outside. "Watson," he murmured, voice calm as the winter river, "our night has begun." And in that moment, neither man could have known just how deep the shadows were about to drag them. The knock at the door still lingered in the silence of Baker Street, like an omen carved in sound. Outside, the fog pressed against the window. blurring the flicker of gaslight lanterns along the street. Dr. John Watson set down his pen, glancing toward Holmes, whose sharp eyes were already fixed upon the door as though he could see through it. Through the wood, through the very soul of the one who waited outside. "Enter," Holmes called, his voice low, certain. The door creaked open, and in stepped a man cloaked in heavy black wool, his hat pulled low, his breath clouding in the icy air. He closed the door behind him, though his hand trembled as he did so. For a moment he said nothing. The silence was broken only by the steady crackle of the fire. "Watson," Holmes whispered, "observe." Watson's gaze fell to the man's hands. They were reddened, not from the cold, but from the sting of rope burns across his wrists. His boots were damp with mud, yet only on one side, as though he had crossed a road where a carriage splashed past. His shoulders slumped with exhaustion, yet his eyes darted about the room like a hunted animal. Holmes rose at last, tall and gaunt, moving not as a man but as a shadow. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "You may sit, and fear not. You have found sanctuary, though you bring London shadows with you." The man collapsed into the chair, breath hitching. He removed his hat, revealing hair streaked with premature grey and a face carved with terror. "Mr. Holmes," he stammered, "Dr. Watson, if you do not help me tonight, I shall be dead before dawn." The words struck the air like a blade. Watson leaned forward. "Good heavens, man, what has happened?" The stranger swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "It began 2 nights ago, with a letter sealed not with wax, but with blood." The fire crackled louder, as though mocking the words. Holmes's eyes gleamed. He reached for the pipe beside him, but did not light it. "A letter," he murmured. "Blood as the seal. How?" "Medieval." The man shuddered. "I dared not show it to the police. I dared not even burn it, for it bore a message not for the world, but for me alone." He reached into his coat with shaking fingers and withdrew a folded sheet of parchment. The edges were stained dark crimson, dried and cracked. Watson felt a chill crawl down his spine as the man placed it upon the table. Holmes, with the precision of a surgeon, opened it. Inside, in jagged handwriting, were only 5 words. "The debt of betrayal comes." Watson frowned. "Betrayal? What betrayal?" The man's lips trembled. "I have made enemies, Doctor. Enemies who wait in silence. Enemies who kill not for coin, but for vengeance. And now they have found me." His eyes flicked to Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, I am not merely threatened. I am hunted." Holmes leaned back, folding his long fingers. His voice was calm, deliberate. "And hunted by whom, sir?" The man's reply came in a whisper, as though the name itself might summon death into the room. "By the Black Chamber." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Watson felt the fire at his back, yet his skin prickled with frost. He had never heard the name, but Holmes's expression told him all he needed. His friend's lips pressed thin, his eyes narrowing with the weight of recognition. For the first time in many months, Watson saw something he had not expected on Sherlock Holmes's face. A flicker of unease. Holmes rose, crossing to the window. He pulled back the curtain. Outside, the fog writhed in the lamplight. The street below was deserted, or seemed to be. Holmes spoke without turning. "Watson, take note. Our guest has brought with him not merely a case, but a curse. For the Black Chamber is no ordinary foe. They are older than Scotland Yard, older than the Empire's laws, a brotherhood bound by silence and sealed by blood. He turned back, his shadow long against the firelight. And if they have marked this man for death, then we may already be too late. The client's hands gripped the armrests. You must help me, Holmes. I cannot face them alone. I cannot. Holmes raised a hand. You will tell us everything, down to the smallest detail. For in such shadows, the smallest detail is the only light we have. Watson's pen was already in hand, ready to record. But even as their guest opened his mouth to speak, a sound split the night outside, a cry, sharp and fleeting, followed by the distant gallop of hooves vanishing into the fog. Holmes's head snapped to the window. Watson, he said, his voice suddenly sharp, urgent. It seems the chamber already knows where their prey has fled. The hunt has begun, and in that instant the door rattled as if struck from outside. For a moment the rattling at the door seemed endless. Then silence fell again, thick and uneasy, broken only by the hiss of the fire and the shallow breath of their guest. His face had drained of color. His eyes darted toward the door as though expecting death itself to stride through at any instant. Holmes, however, did not flinch. He did not rush to the door, nor to the window. He simply watched, head tilted, his sharp features illuminated in fragments by the glow of the hearth. They know, he whispered. The chamber is not blind. Watson set down his pen, the weight of dread pressing against his chest. He could feel the atmosphere of Baker Street shift, as if the walls themselves now leaned in to listen. The stranger's hands still trembled against the armrest. Yet when Holmes gestured for him to continue, he nodded slowly, as though surrendering himself not to safety, but to inevitability. My name, he said at last, his voice low and raw, is Edmund Caro. I was once a clerk in the Foreign Office, a minor man in the grand machinery of empire, but with access to secrets, letters, codes. Do you understand me, Mr. Holmes? Holmes's eyes sharpened. Perfectly. You handled what others only whispered of. Caro nodded, swallowing hard. Years ago, when my post was new, I was approached. Not openly. Never openly. It was always a letter, a shadow in the corner of my eye, a stranger brushing past in the fog. They called themselves the Chamber, though in whispers, always whispers. They asked not for money, but for silence, for obedience. I told myself I could balance both worlds, serve my country by day and feed crumbs to the chamber by night. Small things, harmless things, I thought. But there is no such thing as harmless secrets. Every crumb becomes a feast, and every feast has its cost. His voice cracked on the last word. Watson leaned forward, his physician's instinct stirring at the raw panic in the man's tone. Good God, man, what did they force you into? Caro's eyes flicked toward the window, as though afraid the fog itself might answer. Betrayal, Doctor. Betrayal of the kind that stains the soul. I delivered them messages, movements of men, the names of envoys, the whispers of treaties not yet signed. Things no clerk should know, but I knew them. And I gave them away. For years, I thought myself clever, hidden. But one cannot serve two masters forever. The day comes when both demand their due. The day comes when the debt of betrayal is called. He gestured to the blood-sealed letter on Holmes's desk, his hand shaking. That day is now. Holmes had remained silent, his gaze fixed upon Caro, not with sympathy but with a cold, almost surgical curiosity. At last he rose, moving across the room to the desk where the letter lay. He studied it once more, his fingers tracing the dried crimson seal. Blood, yes, he murmured. But not animal, human, and not drawn fresh, but preserved. A ritual, Watson. A signature. He turned back, eyes gleaming with that eerie light Watson knew too well. The chamber is not merely a circle of conspirators. They are an order, one that cloaks itself in symbols older than this city. They kill not simply to silence, but to remind. Each death is a message. Each victim, a page in their ledger. Caro shuddered, burying his face in his hands. Then I am already dead. No, Holmes said sharply, his voice cutting the air like a blade. Not yet. They would not knock at my door if the deed were already done. They want you afraid. They want you running. Terror is their instrument, and you play the note well. But fear is also their weakness. It leaves tracks. It leaves patterns. Watson rose, uneasy. Holmes, are you suggesting? I am suggesting, Holmes interrupted, that we are already being watched, and that if we wish to know the face of the chamber, we need only step outside these walls. Before Watson could reply, Holmes crossed the room, pulling his long coat from the rack. His movements fluid, unhurried. He seized his deerstalker hat, placed it firmly upon his head, and turned. Watson, your revolver. Bring it. Our friend Caro has delivered us an invitation, and I see no reason to refuse. The three men descended the narrow stairs of 2-1B into the cold breath of Baker Street. The fog was thick, swallowing the glow of the lamps until each seemed a lonely star burning in a sea of darkness. Hooves clattered distantly, a carriage unseen beyond the mist. The street was otherwise still, 'tis still. Holmes's eyes flicked left, then right, scanning every doorway, every shadow. He moved not as a man strolling home, but as a predator in another predator's territory. Watson kept close, one hand at his pocket where his revolver rested. Behind them, Caro shuffled nervously, glancing over his shoulder at every sound. Then, faint but distinct, came the echo of footsteps. Not from ahead, not from behind, but from somewhere beside them, along the narrow alley that split from Baker Street like a wound in the stone. Holmes stopped. Slowly, he turned his head. The alley was drowned in fog, the lamps along its walls nothing but pale halos in the mist. Yet within that haze, something moved, not openly, not with haste. A shadow against shadows, keeping pace. Watson felt his throat tighten. He whispered Holmes. Holmes raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left the alley. Yes, he murmured. They watch. They measure. And if we are to survive, Watson, we must let them believe we are ignorant. The footsteps stopped. For a heartbeat, the silence was unbearable. Then, as if retreating into smoke itself, the shadow was gone. Holmes exhaled, lowering his hand. The chamber has marked its presence. They will not strike tonight. No, they prefer to wait until dread ripens into despair. But make no mistake, Watson. He glanced at Caro, whose face was ashen in the lamplight. They will strike. And when they do, it will be with precision. Caro's voice broke. What am I to do? Where can I hide? Holmes fixed him with a gaze that seemed to cut through the very fog. You do not hide, Mr. Caro. You follow me. For if we are to face the chamber, we must walk willingly into their darkness. And perhaps, he smiled faintly, though it held no warmth, perhaps pull them into ours. The fog thickened, curling around their feet like a living thing. Somewhere far off, a clock struck midnight, its chimes lost in the mist. Watson shivered, for in that moment he felt it, the game had begun, and the chamber's shadow stretched far longer than any man's. The night pressed in heavier, as the three men moved through the fog-drowned labyrinth of London. The sound of their footsteps merged with the damp silence, each echo swallowed by the mist. Gas lamps flickered weakly, their glow unable to pierce the suffocating veil. To walk there was to walk inside a dream or a nightmare. Watson, revolver at his side, could not shake the sensation of eyes upon them. He had marched across deserts in Afghanistan, heard the shriek of bullets and the cries of the dying. Yet this invisible presence chilled him deeper than the battlefield ever had. For, in war, the enemy had a face. Here, the enemy was fog itself. Holmes strode ahead, his coat cutting the mist like a blade, his figure tall, unhurried, deliberate. If he felt fear, he did not show it. Caro, by contrast, lagged behind, his body bent with dread. His every glance over the shoulder carried the weight of a condemned man at last. Holmes raised a hand, halting them at a narrow junction where three streets diverged into the haze. He crouched, his keen eyes scanning the cobblestones, as though the ground itself whispered secrets. "What is it, Holmes?" Watson murmured. Holmes touched the stone with gloved fingers. "Two men," he said. One heavier boots worn at the heel, the other lighter, his stride cautious, favoring the left leg. They waited here. Not long ago. Watson squinted into the mist. You can tell that from the depth of the impressions, the angle of the stride, the disturbance of the soot upon the cobblestones. Come, Watson, you have been too long with your patience, and too little with your observations. Look. And, indeed, when Watson peered closer, he saw faint smudges, not clear prints, but depressions in the grime, as though shadows had leaned too heavily upon the earth. Caro's voice quivered. Then they were here, watching us. Holmes straightened, his expression grim. Not watching, waiting. The chamber rarely wastes their men upon observation alone. If they were here, they were poised to strike. As if in answer, a sound split the night, sharp, metallic, slicing through the silence. The crack of glass. Holmes's eyes snapped upward. Above them, upon the second story of a narrow brick building, a window stood open, and from within, a glint, the cold gleam of steel, down. Holmes barked. A blade hissed through the fog, plunging into the space they had occupied a heartbeat earlier. It struck the cobblestones with a sickening ring, embedding itself deep. Watson dragged Caro aside, heart pounding, while Holmes darted forward with impossible swiftness. He vanished into the fog, his footsteps a phantom echo. Holmes. Watson cried, but the night swallowed his voice. Above, the window slammed shut. Silence returned, oppressive, mocking. Watson pressed Caro against the wall, revolver raised, eyes scouring the shadows. His breath came fast, visible in clouds. Minutes stretched like hours before a voice emerged from the mist behind them. Calm, unbroken, too slow, Holmes said, stepping back into view. His coat bore droplets of fog, his eyes alight with calculation. The window was empty by the time I entered. Our adversary is quick, disciplined, and he leaves no trace. Caro clutched at his chest. They tried to kill me. God in heaven, they tried to. Holmes silenced him with a look. No, they did not aim for you, Caro. The blade fell too far from your line. No, This was meant as a message. They could have struck true if they wished. Watson frowned, unsettled. A message. What message? Holmes stooped, pulling the embedded dagger from the stone. He held it up to the lamplight, where the faintest etchings gleamed upon the steel. Symbols, angular, cruel, carved with ritual precision. The chamber does not write letters alone, Holmes said softly. They carve them into iron, into bone, into flesh. This blade speaks, Watson. And what it says is simple. We are here. Watson felt his stomach turn. He had seen wounds in battle, men broken by war, but never had a weapon felt so coldly deliberate, so ceremonial. This was not the tool of a murderer. It was the instrument of a creed. Holmes tucked the blade into his coat, his voice low. Come, they will not linger after making their mark, but they will follow, always follow. The three pressed on, their footsteps heavier now, every corner promising unseen eyes. At last, Holmes led them to a shabby inn along the river, a place where shadows gathered, so thickly that even the innkeeper's lantern seemed swallowed whole. Holmes secured them a private chamber upstairs, bolting the door firmly. Inside, the air was stale. The floor creaked beneath their boots. Caro collapsed onto the bed, his body trembling with exhaustion. Watson sat by the table, revolver close, though he knew its weight offered little comfort. Holmes paced, his silhouette long and gaunt against the flickering candlelight. At last, Watson broke the silence. Holmes, what is this chamber truly? Who are they? Holmes paused. For once, he seemed to hesitate. His gaze drifted to the shuttered window, to the endless fog pressing against the glass. When he spoke, his words were quieter than Watson had expected. They are betrayal made flesh, Watson. An order born in the old wars, long before you or I drew breath. They were the whisper in the courts of kings, the blade in the dark corners of abbeys. When monarchs plotted, they were already listening. When treaties were signed, they had already been broken. They thrive not upon gold or power, but upon secrets. Secrets are their currency. Betrayal, their law. He turned back, his eyes sharp once more. And now, Watson, they have fixed their gaze upon us. A sudden knock rattled the door. The three men froze. It came again, slow, deliberate. Not the hurried pounding of a drunk or a thief. No, this was measured. Like a clock striking doom, Holmes raised a finger to his lips. The candle guttered, and in the silence, Watson could hear it. The sound of breath, steady, just beyond the door, Holmes whispered. So soft it was almost part of the candle's hiss. They've found us. The silence pressed harder against the chamber walls, as if the fog itself had seeped through the wood and wrapped its fingers around them. The knock came again, slower this time, measured like a ritual. 1, 2, 3. Then stillness. Watson's hand gripped his revolver so tight his knuckles whitened. Caro whimpered softly in the corner, his body trembling like a hunted animal. Holmes, however, stood calm, his gaunt face half lit by the candle flame. His eyes did not blink. Watson, he said softly, the revolver will serve you less than your silence. Another knock, then the faint creak of weight pressing against the door. Whoever stood beyond did not speak, but they breathed. A steady rhythm, drawn long and deep, like the slow intake of a predator savoring the kill before the strike. Holmes moved closer to the door, placing his ear against the wood. He listened for a long moment, and when he spoke again, it was in a whisper edged with certainty. Two men, one tall, weight upon the right heel, the other shorter and carrying steel. Their patience betrays them. They wish us to open the door. Then we do not, Watson growled. Holmes's lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder. Ah, my dear Watson, not opening will only hasten their method. Listen, as if to prove his words. The knock ceased, silence, and then the faint scrape of metal against the lock, slow, deliberate. They were not knocking any more. They were entering. Holmes extinguished the candle with a swift breath. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Positions, he whispered. Watson pressed against the wall, revolver steady. Caro crouched low, muffling his breaths. Holmes stood in the center of the dark, utterly still, as if waiting for a stage curtain to rise. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Only the cold river fog slipped into the room like a ghost, swirling across the floorboards. Then they appeared. Two figures cloaked in black, faces hidden beneath masks of cloth stitched crudely with crimson thread. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, not with fire, but with an emptiness that chilled Watson's blood. They moved with precision, silent as wraiths. One carried a short, curved blade, the other a length of garrote wire coiled in gloved hands. They entered not like burglars, but like priests of a dark rite. Holmes stepped forward, his voice low, commanding. You come uninvited, and yet expected. The taller figure tilted his head. His voice, when it came, was hoarse, guttural, like earth breaking. Caro. The name slithered into the room, and Caro whimpered in the dark. Holmes spread his arms slightly, shielding Caro behind him. You will not have him tonight. The blade glimmered. The figure advanced. A shot thundered in the dark. Watson's revolver cracked the silence like a storm. The shorter figure stumbled, a cry muffled by cloth, but the taller one did not flinch. Instead, he surged forward with inhuman swiftness. Blade raised. Holmes sidestepped, seizing the man's wrist with surgical precision. The knife scraped sparks across the wall as Holmes twisted, his every movement honed and cold. The struggle was silent, desperate, the hiss of breath, the grind of boots. The masked man was strong, stronger than he should have been, but Holmes was precise. Every strike calculated, every motion deliberate. Watson fired again, smoke filling the chamber. The second figure collapsed with a gurgling gasp, the garrote wire falling limp. Holmes wrenched the knife free from the tall man's grip and drove the hilt hard into his masked face. The man reeled but did not cry out. He only staggered, recovered, and fled into the fog, vanishing like a phantom. For a moment, only ragged breathing filled the room. Then Caro screamed. On the wooden floor, the fallen intruder writhed, his mask half torn, blood seeping through the cloth. But his hands, oh, his hands clawed at the boards, not in pain, but as if carving symbols into the wood. His voice rasped broken words, guttural and ancient. Holmes knelt quickly, holding the man down, his sharp eyes fixed upon the dying face. Listen, Watson, he hissed. Listen. The man's voice gurgled, blood bubbling in his throat. The chamber sees all. The candle is lit. The shadows will feast. His body convulsed, then fell still. Silence claimed him. Holmes rose slowly, his expression unreadable. He stared at the corpse for a long, grim moment, then at the strange symbols scratched weakly into the floorboards. A circle, a dagger, and an eye. Their ritual mark, Holmes murmured. This was no assassination. This was initiation. A warning that the hunt has begun. Watson wiped the sweat from his brow, revolver trembling in his grip. Holmes, what have we walked into? Holmes turned to him, his voice low, almost like a confession. Not a case, Watson. A war. The fog curled tighter around the shattered door, as if the city itself leaned closer to listen. Somewhere far across the river, a bell tolled midnight, and in that heavy chime, London seemed to whisper one chilling truth, that the Black Chamber had only just begun. Not a case, Watson. A war. The words hung in the stale air of that riverside chamber long after the last echo of midnight bells faded. Caro sat pale and broken, the corpse at his feet a grim reminder that some wars begin not with fanfare, but with a whisper and a dagger. Holmes stood at the window, gazing into the fog that curled like a living thing against the glass. His sharp features were unreadable, caught between the fire of reason and the weight of foreboding. Watson approached, his voice hushed. Holmes, you speak of war, but who are they? These Black Chamber men. What power commands such devotion? That man died with a prayer on his lips, as if the blade in his hand was more than a weapon, a creed. Holmes did not look at him. His reflection shimmered faintly in the fogged glass, tall and spectral. When he spoke, his tone was colder than Watson had ever heard. They are not new, Watson. They are old. Older than this city, older than this crown. Their roots coil back through centuries of betrayal, back into the age of torches and crowns, where shadows held more sway than kings. He turned, his eyes alive with grim certainty. Have you ever wondered, Watson, how kingdoms fall not by armies, but by whispers? How monarchs, emperors, and popes have been struck down not upon battlefields, but in chambers, chapels, and feasts? That is the chamber's hand. Always unseen, always unnamed. They are the knife that slips between treaties, the ink that stains alliances red. Watson's brow furrowed. You make them sound less like men and more like phantoms. Phantoms they may as well be, Holmes replied. Their name, the Black Chamber, was first whispered in the courts of medieval Europe. At first, they were but a cadre of scribes, tasked with opening letters and intercepting secrets. Kings trusted them, for knowledge is power. But secrets are sharper than any blade. Holmes began to pace, his voice weaving through the dim chamber like the very fog outside. By the 13th century, they had transformed. No longer mere readers of letters, they became the silencers of tongues. When a noble whispered treason, he was found lifeless in his bed. When a monk betrayed the confidence of a king, he was found face down in the cloister's well. Always sudden, always inexplicable. It was said their knives were sanctified in shadows, their blades anointed in betrayal. And still, no court would speak their name aloud. For to name the chamber was to draw their gaze. Caro, his voice thin and trembling, muttered, "They are demons. I should never have touched their hand. Never." Holmes's gaze cut to him. "And yet you did, Caro. Which is why their eyes are upon you now. You betrayed them. And the chamber does not forgive betrayal. It worships it. It is their lifeblood." Watson exhaled, slowly, unsettled. So these men, they are heirs to centuries of murder and treachery. But why now, Holmes? Why return here, to London? Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing as if at a thought not yet fully formed. Because London is the heart of an empire, and the chamber thrives upon hearts. The room fell silent again, broken only by the faint groan of timbers as the river wind pressed against the walls. Watson felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him, as though the chamber's shadows had already seeped into their bones. Holmes finally spoke again, low, deliberate. "This is no common adversary, Watson. This is not a thief, nor a murderer. This is history itself, rising from its grave." And as he said it, far across the river, a bell tolled again, not for midnight, but for the dawn creeping through the fog. Yet in that grey and unholy truth settled in Watson's mind. That night had not ended. It had only begun. The pale light of morning seeped through the filthy panes of the riverside inn, yet it brought no warmth. The fog remained, clinging, suffocating, as if London itself refused to allow dawn its dominion. The corpse from the night's assault had been disposed of discreetly, lowered into the dark waters of the Thames before the city stirred. But the mark carved into the floorboards, the circle, the dagger, the watching eye lingered like a wound. Watson had scrubbed at it with water and cloth, but Holmes stopped him. "Leave it," he said sharply. "It is a reminder. The chamber desires its symbols to endure. Erasure would not destroy their meaning, only conceal it. And I do not deal in concealment, Watson. I deal in revelation." Caro, pale and exhausted, sat hunched in the corner, his face buried in his hands. Every sound, the groan of the floorboards, the drip of water beyond the window, made him flinch. He looked a man already half dead, consumed by his own fear. Holmes, however, was alive with thought. His long fingers moved ceaselessly across a notebook, sketching the symbols, annotating with references from memory. His eyes burned with the peculiar fire Watson knew well, the fire of a puzzle unraveling, even amidst danger. At last, Holmes spoke. "Caro, you must tell us all, every detail. Leave nothing concealed. The smallest thread may bind the largest web." Caro shuddered. I was employed at the Treasury as a clerk. 3 years past, I intercepted certain sealed letters from Vienna, orders meant for the Foreign Office. At first I thought it simple error, but the letters bore strange marks in their margins, codes, patterns. This same eye you now see before you. Watson leaned forward, tension in his brow. "You mean to say the chamber's hand was in government correspondence?" Caro nodded, his eyes wild. "They were everywhere. Letters between diplomats, notes smuggled in merchant ledgers, even ecclesiastical decrees. They had infiltrated not just our politics, but our pulpits, our coffers, our very faith." I was terrified. And yet he faltered, voice breaking. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And yet you used their secrets for profit." Caro's silence was confession enough. His hands trembled against his knees. Holmes continued, merciless but precise. "You intercepted what you should not. You sold whispers meant only for shadows. And now, Caro, the chamber demands payment. They do not take coin. They take silence, permanent silence." Caro collapsed into sobs, his body shaking. Watson felt a stir of pity, but said nothing. He had seen this before. Men broken by forces larger than themselves, consumed by the very fire they sought to grasp. Holmes turned back to his notebook. His voice was low, almost to himself. "The chamber's earliest form, yes. The cabinet noir of France. the black chambers of Austria, but older still. Letters opened in cloisters, secrets carried in Latin across kingdoms, sealed with wax and broken in shadow. Always the same hand, the same design, betrayal woven as a craft. He closed the notebook with a sharp snap. "Watson, we require the archives. The secrets Caro speaks of will not be found in police records or treasury ledgers. No, they rest where London buries its darkest truths, in the vaults beneath the Guildhall." Watson frowned. The Guild, that labyrinth of dust and parchment. Holmes allowed the faintest smile. "Precisely. It is there we will find their ghost. And ghosts, Watson, are best confronted in daylight, or what passes for daylight in this city." By noon, the three men moved through the narrow, echoing streets, their carriage jolting over uneven stones. The Guildhall rose before them, a fortress of civic pride, its Gothic windows dark against the mist. Few Londoners knew what lay beneath its floors: centuries of archives, records sealed from the public eye, where the whispers of kings and traitors slept in dust. Within, a clerk led Holmes reluctantly into the lower vaults. The air was thick with mold and ink, the scent of parchment that had outlived generations. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into shadow, each stacked with boxes bound in leather, labels scrawled in hands long since stilled. Watson's voice carried in a hushed echo. "If the chamber hides in history, Holmes, this place would be its crypt." Holmes moved swiftly, his eyes scanning labels with uncanny speed. He paused before one shelf, pulling free a heavy tome bound in cracked vellum. Dust swirled as he laid it upon a table. Inside, the pages bore transcripts of intercepted letters, some from merchants, some from monarchs. Yet in their margins, faint but chilling, were marks. The same marks etched upon the blade, carved upon their chamber floor. The eye, the dagger, the circle, always the circle. Holmes's long finger traced the ink. His voice lowered, reverent yet grim. They signed history itself with this mark. Kings thought their words sacred, unbroken. But the chamber had already slit the seal. Empires rose upon treaties already betrayed. Watson bent closer, reading aloud. Letter from His Majesty Edward III. Warnings of French spies. Holmes, this dates to the 14th century. Holmes's expression did not change, and you may find the same in the 15th, 16th, and every century thereafter. The chamber is not an organization, Watson. It is an inheritance. As they read, the air seemed colder, as though the vault itself disapproved of their prying. Candlelight wavered, shadows lengthened. Even Caro, hunched in fear, dared not breathe too loudly. Then Holmes stopped upon one passage. His sharp eyes narrowed. Here, a cipher within the cipher. He pulled a scrap of paper and began to scribble, muttering under his breath. Watson watched the old rhythm take over the rapid scratching of pencil, the fire of reason burning through the fog of secrecy. Holmes's deductions spilled out, a torrent of insight. At last he looked up, his eyes blazing. The chamber has always marked not merely their deeds, but their meeting places. This code is no different. Here, hidden in the margins of a letter 5 centuries old, is a location. A chapel, abandoned, forgotten by time, but not by them. Watson felt a chill. A chapel where... Holmes closed the book, his voice low and certain. Not far, Watson. South of the river, beneath the shadow of Southwark Cathedral, the words seemed to thrum in the stale air. Even Caro shivered, his face pale as wax. Holmes stood, his coat settling about him like a shroud. Gentlemen, history has given us an invitation. The chamber waits where the stones remember prayers long since silenced, and it is there we shall meet them. South of the river, London shed even the pretense of civility. The streets narrowed into crooked alleys where gaslight could not reach, where the fog coiled thick as cloth and the Thames stank of rot and refuse. The city's heartbeat slowed here, and in its place throbbed something older. Darker Dot's son sat stiffly in the rattling carriage, revolver concealed in his coat. Beside him, Caro huddled in silence, eyes darting like a cornered rat. Holmes alone seemed untouched by dread. His gaze was fixed beyond the misted window, sharp and unblinking, as though the fog itself might confess its secrets if only stared at long enough. At last the carriage halted before the looming shadow of Southwark Cathedral. Its spire vanished into mist, a black finger pointing to heavens long abandoned, but Holmes did not lead them through the cathedral's grand doors. Instead, he guided them down a side street, narrow and uneven, where weeds burst between stones and walls, leaned like drunks in the dark. There it stood, the chapel, forgotten, sunken into time's embrace. Its roof sagged, windows gaping like empty sockets. Stone angels eroded by centuries stared faceless into the mist. The wooden doors were barred, yet one hung askew, leaving a mouth of darkness yawning within. Caro stopped short, his breath sharp. No, not inside. I've heard whispers of this place. Men who wander in at night. They don't walk back out. Holmes's hand gripped Caro's shoulder, firm and cold. And yet tonight, Caro, we do. Fear is their weapon, but reason is ours. Stay close. Watson followed, every nerve taut, as Holmes pushed the heavy door. The sound groaned through the ruins, echoing like a dying hymn. Inside, the chapel was drowned in shadow. The air smelled of mildew and ancient incense, of prayers rotted into silence. A broken altar crouched at the far end, its stone cracked, its surface stained with black marks that might once have been candle burns or blood. Holmes moved forward, his every step measured, his lantern beam slicing through the dark. Watson's own light trembled against crumbling pews and shattered glass. Caro lingered at the threshold, his frame stiff with terror. The silence was immense, yet within it there were signs, faint, deliberate. Holmes crouched before the altar. His long fingers traced grooves carved into the stone, circular patterns intersected by dagger-like lines converging upon a single eye. The same mark, the same creed. Watson shivered. So it is true. This is one of their sanctuaries. Holmes's voice was quiet, analytical, yet touched by something colder. Not sanctuary, Watson. A crucible. A place where vows were spoken, not to God, but to shadows. See how the circle is cut deep into the altar's very heart. This was no vandalism. It was ritual. He lifted his lantern higher. Upon the chapel walls, more marks emerged, half hidden beneath grime and ivy. The same symbols, repeated, layered, as though etched again and again by different hands across centuries. Caro's whisper cracked the silence. I have seen it. In letters, in seals. They bind their oaths with this sign. Those who bear it belong to them. Watson's voice tightened. And you, Caro, did you bear it? Caro shook his head violently. Never. I stole their whispers, yes, but I never bore their mark. That is why they hunt me. I betrayed their covenant without bowing to it." Holmes turned sharply, lantern casting his face into stark relief. "Then they will not rest until the debt is paid. Betrayal is their sacrament, and every sacrament demands blood." The words had scarcely left his lips when a sound stirred in the chapel's shadows. It was faint, a rustle, a scrape, like cloth brushing against stone. Watson swung his lantern toward the noise, revolver raised. The light swept across broken pews, shattered icons, and then movement. A shape slid back into the dark, cloaked, silent, watching. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "They are here." The lantern light caught upon a corner of the chapel, a figure half hidden in shadow, masked as before, with crimson thread glinting faintly across the cloth. The figure did not move forward. It only stood, watching. And then another shape appeared beside it. Then another, 3, 4. Watson's breath quickened. "Holmes, we are surrounded." Holmes did not flinch. He set the lantern upon the altar, its flame steady. "Yes, Watson, surrounded not by men, but by a creed centuries old. And now, at last, the creed shows its face." The figures stepped forward, slowly, their boots silent upon the ruined floor. Their masks were identical, their movements synchronized, as though they were less men than shadows given form. One raised a hand, gloved fingers splayed in ritual gesture. Caro collapsed to his knees, his voice breaking. "Mercy, mercy." But no reply came. Only silence, heavy and deliberate. The silence of judgment. Holmes's hand tightened on the dagger he had taken from their attacker the night before. His voice, calm yet edged with fire, cut through the stillness. "You carry the mark of shadows, but shadows cannot hide from reason, and reason stands before you now." The figures did not answer, but as the lantern flame flickered, Watson swore he saw the faintest curl of a smile beneath the crimson-stitched masks. Then the nearest figure moved slow, deliberate, reaching for the circle carved into the altar stone. His gloved hand pressed upon it, and with a grinding sound, the altar shifted. A section of the floor yawned open, stone grinding against stone, revealing a stairwell descending into pure darkness. From its depths rose a chill, a breath of ancient air carrying whispers Watson could not understand. Words in a tongue older than English, older than London itself. Holmes's eyes glimmered. "Ah, so the chapel is not merely a sanctuary. It is a doorway." The masked figures stepped back, gesturing silently toward the stairs. An invitation, or a demand? Holmes turned to Watson, his expression unreadable. "The choice is ours, my dear friend. Retreat to ignorance, or descend into history's very maw." And as the fog curled through the broken windows, Watson knew with a sick certainty that there was no true choice at all. For the chamber had already written the next move. The grinding of the altar stone echoed like a groan from the earth itself. The stairs yawning below seemed to breathe a chill that had not touched daylight in centuries. Holmes leaned forward, lantern lifted, and the flame trembled as though reluctant to descend. "Watson," Holmes murmured, voice low and steady, "steel yourself. Whatever lies beneath, we must look upon it with clear eyes." Watson gripped his revolver tighter. "Clear eyes, yes, though my heart already rebels." Holmes's gaze flicked to the silent masked figures. They made no move to follow nor to hinder. They only stood sentinel, 4 shadows at the broken altar, as if their role was merely to open the way and witness what followed. Holmes placed a foot upon the first step. The stone was slick with age, worn smooth by countless tread. He descended. Watson followed, each step carrying them deeper into the earth, deeper into silence. Behind them, Caro shuffled with hesitant feet, his breath loud in the suffocating dark. The stairwell spiraled down into a cavernous chamber. The lantern light caught upon damp walls, upon arches of carved stone. This was no mere cellar. It was a crypt, vast and ancient, its air heavy with incense long faded. Sarcophagi lined the walls, their lids carved with faceless knights, hands folded across swords, now dulled to dust. The very air seemed to whisper of vows and betrayals buried with them. Holmes paused, studying the floor. The dust bore no spiderwebs, no stillness of centuries. Instead, faint scuff marks wound across the stone, as though boots had passed through here not days ago, but hours. They used this place, Holmes whispered, not as relic, but as living sanctum. Watson's lantern swept further, and there in the center of the crypt stood an altar of black marble, untouched by dust, its surface gleaming as though polished by endless hands. Upon it lay a book, thick and bound in cracked leather. Its clasp was wrought iron, its lock unbroken. Around the altar, unlit candles formed a circle, their wax melted into hardened rivulets like frozen tears. Caro gasped. The Codex. It is said their laws are written within. No man outside the chamber has laid eyes upon it. Holmes approached, his lantern casting the book's shadow long across the floor. His hand hovered, but did not touch. His sharp eyes traced the markings upon the altar, the same circular crest, carved deep, as though the Codex itself were its heart. Then, faintly, a sound stirred, a whisper, not of stone, not of air, a human whisper, but from where? Watson turned sharply, lantern flaring across the crypt. The sarcophagi stared back, silent. Yet the whisper grew, swelling into a low chant. Words in a language neither man recognized, a tongue heavy with guttural weight. The sound did not come from one throat. It came from many. Caro shrank behind them, trembling. They are here. Not men, but their echoes. The oath. Once they begin the chant, it does not stop. Holmes's eyes darted to the shadows. Figures stirred between the stone coffins. Hooded shapes, their faces lost to the dark. One by one, they stepped forward into the candle circle, their movements slow, deliberate. Their hands lifted, palms out, as the chant deepened. Watson raised his revolver. Holmes caught his arm, lowering it. No rash fire, Watson. This is not brute force, but theatre. Observe. The figures encircled them. A dozen, perhaps more, each mask stitched with crimson. Their chant swelled, echoing from the crypt's stone ribs, until it seemed the very earth itself spoke against them. Holmes studied their pattern, the distance between each, the rhythm of their voices, the way they turned their heads, as one. It is ritualized, Holmes whispered. A demonstration of control. They seek not to slay us, but to bind us in spectacle. Then, from the darkness beyond the circle, a single voice broke apart from the chant. Deep, resonant, every word like a hammer against the air. You trespass, seekers. You profane the sacred ground. A figure stepped forward. Unlike the others, his mask was not plain, but crowned with thorns of wrought iron. He carried a staff tipped with silver, upon which gleamed the same carved eye. Caro collapsed fully to the ground. The warden. Holmes's gaze sharpened. So at last, a name. The warden raised his staff. The chant fell silent. His words carried in the hush. Every shadow demands a keeper. I am he. And now, intruders, you stand upon the edge of the circle. The codex judges all who gaze upon it. Will you turn away, or offer yourselves to its trial? Holmes's lips curved in the faintest ghost of a smile. The codex judges, you say. Then I will let it judge me. For reason bows to no circle, and no shadow frightens truth. The warden lowered the staff toward him, the silver eye glinting in the lantern light. The circle of masked figures closed in, their hands reaching as one. Watson's heart pounded. For the first time, he saw something flicker in Holmes's eyes, not fear, but calculation balanced upon the knife's edge. And then, without warning, the lantern flame guttered and went out. Darkness swallowed the crypt whole. Darkness swallowed them whole. The moment the lantern flame died, the crypt became a tomb without end. Watson's breath thundered in his ears, each inhalation sharp and ragged. Somewhere close, Caro whimpered like a child, his fear stripped raw. Holmes. Watson hissed, clutching the revolver tight in his fist. I am here, came Holmes's voice, calm, steady, and terrifyingly close. Do not fire, Watson. They want confusion. We must not grant them blood in the dark. The chant resumed, low and guttural, rising from all around. It seemed to echo from the sarcophagi, from the very stone beneath their boots. The voices folded into one another, until Watson could no longer tell how many there were, nor from where dot, and then light, not flame, not lantern, but cold fire, blue and spectral, flaring to life in sconces along the crypt walls. The sudden glow revealed the masked figures once more, their crimson stitches glimmering like fresh wounds. Their circle was unbroken, their hands raised in solemn unity. In the center, before the black altar, the warden stood with his staff of silver, its eye glinting in the ghostly light. His voice boomed like a verdict. You stand within the circle of oaths. No blade, no bullet, no law of your crown can touch you here. Only truth. Only the codex. Watson steadied himself, revolver aimed at the warden's chest. What madness is this? Truth from masked cowards. Holmes stepped forward, hand raised to lower Watson's weapon. His gaze locked upon the codex resting on the altar. No, Watson. This is not madness. This is theater. A stage older than this crypt itself. They mean to frighten us, but also to test us. The warden struck the floor with his staff. The sound cracked like thunder, and in its wake the ground trembled. From the darkness of the crypt's far side, a hidden panel ground open. Chains clattered. Two figures emerged, dragged forward by hooded guards. Their faces were pale, hollow-eyed, mouths gagged with cloth. Watson's heart lurched. Prisoners, Caro gasped. No, no, they swore those men had vanished. They were his words broke into silence as the gagged men were cast to their knees before the altar. The warden's voice thundered again. They are traitors to the chamber. Their punishment was sealed, unless another takes their burden. His eyes, black pools behind the mask, turned to Holmes. You seek truth? Then truth comes with choice. Judge them, or join them. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The codex lay between them, silent, locked. But he did not step closer. Instead, He studied the captives with razor focus. Their clothes, though ragged, bore faint traces of insignia, sigils Watson did not recognize. But Holmes's gaze flickered with recognition. "Watson," he murmured, "note the stitching on their cuffs. Medieval, but not English. These men were taken from beyond London, beyond the Isle, perhaps." Watson's chest tightened. "Then their reach is wider than we feared," Holmes finished. The warden lifted his staff once more. The circle of masked men moved closer, their chant building into a fever pitch. The captives trembled on their knees, muffled cries swallowed by stone. Watson's instincts screamed. "Holmes, we can't let this stand. We must act." Holmes's hand snapped up, silencing him. His voice, calm yet edged with ice, cut through the chant. "You demand a judgment. Very well. I will give you one." He stepped into the circle, his long coat brushing the dust, his silhouette stark against the cold flame. The masked figures seemed to lean in, the chant subsiding as though the crypt itself bent closer to hear his words. Holmes's voice rang, clear and sharp as a blade. "If these men are traitors, then their betrayal is not of your chamber, but of truth. For truth itself cannot be shackled by oaths spoken in darkness. If you demand I judge, then hear this: your creed is not law. It is disease, and every disease has its cure." The warden's staff struck the ground again, sparks flaring from the silver eye. For a heartbeat, the crypt was alive with light and fury, and then silence. Every masked figure turned as one, their heads angling toward the codex. The book pulsed faintly, as though alive, its clasped trembling against the altar stone. Caro fell flat, his voice breaking into sobs. "No, no, you've angered it." Watson's blood turned to ice as the codex's lock snapped open on its own, the iron clasp falling away with a metallic scream. The pages shuddered, their edges curling as if caught in wind, though no air stirred. Holmes did not flinch. He stepped closer, the cold fire washing his face in blue. "At last," he murmured, "the codex reveals itself." And with a sound like the groan of 1,000 graves, the book opened. The codex breathed, its pages fanned as though stirred by invisible hands. The vellum yellowed with centuries, yet supple as flesh. Strange symbols bled across the parchment lines, not written, but seared into the page by something older than ink. The air thickened. The blue fire dimmed, and the chant hushed to a low hum. Watson felt his knees weaken. He gripped his revolver as though it might tether him to sanity. "Holmes," he whispered hoarsely, "it moves, of its own will." Holmes did not step back. Instead, he leaned closer, eyes narrowing upon the writhing script. "No, not of its own will. These men have conditioned themselves to respond to it. This is psychology ritualized, fear weaponized. Look at their stance, Watson. They bow to paper as though it were God." The warden's voice thundered, echoing from the stone ribs above. "The codex remembers all oaths, every betrayal, every death sworn in silence. And tonight, it remembers you." The pages stilled. One line of text shimmered, words surfacing in sharp relief, though written in a medieval tongue. Their shape twisted until Watson could somehow understand. "Two seekers shall trespass the circle. One shall betray the other, and the chamber shall endure." The words scorched themselves into his mind. He staggered back, revolver shaking in his hand. "Holmes, it names us." For the first time, Holmes's mask of composure flickered. His jaw tightened, though his voice remained calm. A fabrication. Prophecy is the refuge of liars who cannot endure truth. They mean to set us against each other. Yet even as he spoke, the chant rose again, pulsing with the prophecy's rhythm. One shall betray the other. One shall betray the other. The words seemed to dig beneath Watson's skin, burrowing into bone. Caro shrieked, clawing at his ears. It knows. It always knows. No man escapes the Codex. Holmes's hand snapped out, seizing Caro by the collar. Compose yourself, man. They rely on your fear to validate their theater. His voice dropped, fierce. Listen to me, Watson. Every lie has seams. Every illusion breaks if struck at the right angle. The warden raised his staff, its silver eye gleaming. Then strike, seeker. If truth is yours, deny the Codex, deny the oath, deny the betrayal written upon your bond. The masked circle parted, leaving a path between Holmes and Watson. The cold fire burned brighter, illuminating the distance between them. The air pressed heavy, as though demanding they step apart. Watson's heart thundered. He knew Holmes would not falter, and yet, for the first time, he felt the weight of doubt. Could it be true? Could their partnership, forged in danger and fire, fracture in this abyss of shadows? Holmes's eyes met his. For a moment, Watson saw not the calculating detective, but the man, weary, relentless, shoulders bowed beneath burdens none could name. And then Holmes spoke, his words cutting the silence. Watson, he said softly, if betrayal comes, it shall not come from prophecy, but from choice, and I choose you. The chant faltered, rippling with unease. The warden's staff trembled as the Codex's pages twitched. Holmes stepped to the altar, placing his hand upon the black marble. His voice rose like iron through the crypt. You write lies upon dead parchment, but men write truth upon their actions, and ours are not finished. The Codex shuddered violently, its pages fluttering as though in rage. The blue flames flared high, casting the crypt in blinding light. The masked figures staggered, their chant breaking into disarray. And in that moment of chaos, Holmes's hand darted forward, seizing the cod. At the cry that erupted, shook the crypt like thunder. The masked figures lunged, the warden's staff slammed against stone, and the Codex's pages flared with spectral fire in Holmes's grasp. Watson raised his revolver, his voice hoarse with resolve. Holmes, for God's sake, move. The crypt erupted into violence. The Codex burned cold in Holmes's grasp. Not fire, not flesh, but something heavier, like ice pressed into bone. Its pages writhed, symbols shifting as though alive. Every masked figure lunged at once, the chant erupting into a howl. Holmes's voice cut through the chaos. Watson, left flank. Watson swung his revolver, the shot cracking through the crypt. The bullet struck a torch bracket, shattering iron, and blue flames spilled wildly across the chamber. Shadows danced like twisted puppets, and the sudden blaze scattered half the circle. Holmes surged forward, coat sweeping, the Codex clutched tight. He slammed his shoulder into a masked figure, sending him sprawling into a sarcophagus. Stone cracked, dust billowed, and ancient bones tumbled across the floor. The warden roared. His staff struck the ground, sparks leaping from the silver eye. The Codex is not yours. It cannot leave the circle. Watson fired again, the blast echoing. A masked follower collapsed, clutching his arm. The others hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. They surged forward like a tide, hands clawing, chanting broken into snarls. Caro screamed, stumbling back into the shadows. "They'll kill us all." "Leave the book." Holmes pivoted, eyes ablaze with focus. "Watson, the stairwell, hold them off." Watson moved without hesitation. Planting himself before the narrow passage, he raised his revolver with soldier's precision. Shots cracked, sparks showered, stone, masked men reeled. Yet still they came, their bodies unflinching, as though pain itself were beneath them. Holmes darted to the altar, slamming the codex shut. The force of it sent a ripple through the crypt, the blue flames shuddering. For an instant, silence reigned. Then the book pulsed violently in his hands, and every torch guttered out. Darkness swallowed them again, but Holmes was ready. His voice, sharp as a whip, rang through the black. "They see with ritual, not eyes. Disrupt the rhythm." Watson obeyed without question. He overturned a coffin, its stone lid shattering against the floor. The thunderous crash broke the chant's cadence, scattering their rhythm. Another lid fell, then another. The crypt filled with chaos, bones spilling, stone breaking, chants shattering into discord. Holmes seized the moment. He hurled the codex into Watson's hands. "Guard it with your life." Watson's stomach dropped at the weight of it, the chill of it seeping through his coat. Holmes had already turned, dagger flashing in his hand. He lunged into the circle, not as brute, but as precision incarnate. Each strike targeted a wrist, a knee, a throat, disabling, disarming, never wasted. The masked figures reeled, staggering back, their unity broken. The warden advanced through the chaos, staff raised high. "Fools, the codex binds you already. Its prophecy will not fail." Holmes met him in the circle's heart. The staff crashed against dagger, sparks flaring. Silver eye clashed with steel, each strike echoing through the crypt like thunder. Watson, clutching the codex, watched in horror as Holmes's blade skittered across stone. The warden's strength was inhuman, his strikes precise, relentless. Holmes dodged, parried, his coat tearing under the staff's arc. Then a cry. Caro stumbled into the fray, hands raised in surrender. "Stop, stop, I'll return it. Spare me." Watson's blood turned to ice. Caro pointed straight at him, at the codex in his grasp. "The doctor has it. Take him, and let me live." The circle turned. Every masked face pivoted in unison toward Watson. Watson's revolver trembled in one hand, the codex heavy in the other. His heart pounded with betrayal. "Caro, you devil!" Holmes's voice roared above the din. "Watson, move." But even as Watson leapt back toward the stairwell, the circle surged as one. Masked hands reached, claws outstretched. Shadows closing in, and in that instant, Watson knew the prophecy had already begun. The crypt became a storm. Watson's lungs burned as he staggered. Toward the stairwell, codex clutched to his chest. Every step felt like dragging a corpse through water. The book pulsed cold, heavier than iron, as though it meant to root him in place. Masked figures swarmed, their chants twisted into snarls, hands clawing for him. He fired once, twice, the muzzle flash searing the dark. A figure fell, another reeled back, clutching his shoulder, but still they pressed in. Watson swung the revolver like a club, striking one across the mask, bone and fabric cracking beneath the blow. Blood sprayed across the ancient stones. "Holmes," he gasped, the word ripped from his throat. Holmes fought in the circle's heart, every motion as precise as a surgeon's cut. His dagger darted, slicing the strap of a mask, tearing cloth from bone-white skin beneath. He pivoted, coat flaring, and drove his shoulder into another, sending the man sprawling into a shattered coffin. Bones spilled, the chant fractured, but the warden was relentless. His staff carved arcs of silver, each blow forcing Holmes back toward the altar. Sparks lit their faces in brief flashes. Holmes is sharp, focused, burning with defiance. The warden's hidden beneath iron thorns, unreadable, inhuman. "You cannot defy the Codex." The warden roared, voice booming like the collapse of stone. "One of you will betray the other. It is written." Holmes's dagger locked against the staff, steel groaning. His voice, though strained, rang with fury. "Then I shall betray nothing. Not my friend, not reason, not truth." The warden shoved, strength like iron. Holmes stumbled, crashing against the altar. The Codex pulsed violently in Watson's arms, pages writhing as though feeding on the clash. Caro crawled across the floor, shrieking, "Give it to them, Watson. Give it back before it kills us all." Watson's eyes blazed. "Better to die with truth than live on your knees." He slammed the revolver's butt across Caro's temple, sending him sprawling unconscious across the stones. The warden raised his staff for the killing blow. "Then you both die in the circle." Holmes, breath ragged, snatched a shattered fragment of stone from the altar. With sudden force, he hurled it into the silver eye of the staff. The impact cracked metal, sparks erupting. The warden staggered, roaring, as the staff fractured in his grip. And in that instant, the Codex shrieked. Not sound, but force. A violent ripple that surged through the crypt. Candles toppled, flames guttered, the very walls shuddered. Ancient arches groaned, dust cascading from the ceiling. The sarcophagi split, stone lids toppling like dominoes. "The chamber," Watson cried. "It's collapsing." Holmes seized the moment. He tore the dagger from his belt, driving it into the warden's shoulder. The masked giant howled, staggering back as blood spattered across the altar. "What's in the stairwell?" "Now," Holmes roared. Watson clutched the Codex and charged, boots pounding the shaking stones. Holmes followed close, dragging Caro's half-conscious form by the collar. Behind them, masked figures scrambled in panic, their unity shattered, their chant broken into terrified cries. The ceiling cracked. Pillars split. Dust filled the air like smoke. The stairwell gaped ahead, narrow and jagged. Their single salvation. Watson stumbled upward, lungs screaming, Codex dragging at his arms like a curse. Holmes shoved Caro ahead, his own breath ragged. Stones rained from above, the crypt crumbling into ruin. Behind them, the warden's voice bellowed one last time, echoing through the collapsing tomb. "You cannot flee prophecy. One shall betray the other. The Codex will have its price." The stairwell shuddered. A final explosion of stone and dust erupted as the crypt caved in, burying the altar, the chant, and the chamber's circle beneath a mountain of ruin. Watson burst into the chapel above, gasping, Codex clutched to his chest. Holmes emerged seconds later, dragging Caro into the moonlit ruin of the nave. The chapel's broken angels stared faceless down as the earth shook beneath them. Then, silence. Only their labored breaths filled the air. The crypt was gone. The chamber entombed. Watson staggered, leaning against a shattered pew. "Holmes, we escaped. By God, we escaped." Holmes stood rigid, dust caked to his coat, dagger still wet in his hand, his eyes fixed upon the codex, still pulsing faintly in Watson's arms. Slowly he spoke, voice low, grim, unshakable. "No, Watson, we did not escape. We carry it now, and it will not rest until its prophecy is answered." Watson's stomach turned cold, for though the crypt was gone, the words still whispered in his skull, etched in fire. One shall betray the other. London's fog had never felt heavier. It rolled through Baker Street like a restless tide, swallowing the lamps, softening the gaslight into halos of smoke. The clatter of hooves echoed distant, muffled, as though the city itself hushed in uneasy sleep. Within the familiar walls of 2-1B, the fire crackled, but even its warmth could not chase the crypt's chill from their bones. Watson sat stiffly in his chair, hands trembling faintly as he poured brandy. The codex lay upon the desk, shrouded in a cloth, yet its presence seemed to seep through fabric and wood alike. He swore he could hear it, faint whispers, not in the air, but in his skull. One shall betray the other. One shall betray. He drowned the whisper with a long swallow of brandy, his throat burning. Holmes stood at the window, coat still dusted with cryptic ash, pipe unlit between his fingers. His gaze was fixed not on the street below, but on his reflection in the glass, sharp cheekbones, weary eyes, the faint tremor of a man who had seen too much. "Watson," he said at last, voice low, flat, "what did you hear?" Watson's hand clenched around the glass. "I heard the prophecy, as you did." Holmes turned, eyes narrowing. "No, not what was written. What you heard, the words bent themselves. They meant to divide us." Watson swallowed hard. And if they were not lies? If he hesitated, the fire snapping in the silence. If it was truth? Holmes's eyes sharpened like a blade unsheathed. "Then truth is a chain I shall break with my own hands. Prophecy holds no dominion over Will Watson. Remember that." Yet his fingers betrayed him. They tapped, restless, against the sill, a rhythm of doubt he could not silence. The door creaked. Mrs. Hudson entered softly, setting down a tray of bread and tea. Her kindly face furrowed as her eyes flickered to the shrouded bundle on the desk. "That thing, Mr. Holmes, it chills the room, like a grave opened indoors. I beg you, get rid of it." Watson's jaw tightened. "Would that we could, but it seems we are its wardens now." Holmes exhaled smoke from an unlit pipe, setting it aside. "No, Watson, not wardens, prisoners." The clock struck midnight. Outside, the fog thickened. Somewhere, faint and distant, a carriage wheel screeched against cobblestones. Watson rose, crossing to the desk. His fingers hovered above the shrouded codex, not touching, only feeling its weight pressing invisibly against the air. "Holmes," he murmured. The chamber collapsed, its circle buried. "Surely this nightmare is finished." Holmes's reply was cold as steel. "Nightmares are not finished, Watson. They are inherited." As if to prove him right, the fire guttered suddenly low, though no draught stirred. The shadows thickened, and from outside, faint as breath against glass, came the sound of footsteps, measured, deliberate, pausing just beyond the door of 2-1B. Holmes and Watson froze. The footsteps ceased. Silence swallowed the house. Then a single slip of parchment slid beneath the door. its edges blackened, its surface marked with the same seared script as the codex. Holmes stooped, lifting it carefully. The words blazed in fresh ink. The chamber does not die. The codex is not yours. Return what was stolen, or the betrayal shall begin. Holmes's eyes glimmered in the firelight, unreadable. He handed the note to Watson without a word. Watson's stomach turned cold, for beneath the words, smeared in dried crimson, lay a seal, the iron eye of the warden. The fog lay like a coffin lid upon London. Gas lamps flickered, dim and weak, swallowed whole by the mist. Hooves clattered faintly, but no carriage could be seen, only echoes. The night seemed hollow, as if the city had emptied itself to make room for something else. Holmes walked briskly, coat drawn close, eyes darting with surgical precision from shadow to shadow. Watson followed at his shoulder, revolver snug against his hip, the codex wrapped and hidden in a leather satchel. The note still burned in his pocket. Like a coal, return what was stolen, or the betrayal shall begin. Holmes, Watson murmured, what if they follow us now? That note, they knew where we lived. Holmes's jaw tightened. They have always known. The chamber is not confined to crypts and ruins. It is a spider's web. You only see the strands when you are caught. They turned into Fleet Street, fog curling around the cobbles like smoke from a battlefield. Suddenly, Holmes halted, one gloved hand raised. His eyes narrowed, scanning the mist. Watson, he whispered, do not look behind you. He follows. Watson's pulse quickened. How many? One, for now. Holmes's tone was sharp, certain. Step into the lamplight. Walk as though unaware. Let him draw nearer. Watson obeyed. His boots clicked steady on the wet stones. The gaslight above hummed faintly, its glow barely piercing the fog. He could hear it now, faint, deliberate steps behind, keeping pace. Holmes's voice was a ghost against his ear. He will strike before the bridge. Hold fast until then. The street narrowed, walls leaning close like conspirators. The fog thickened, muffling every sound, until a sudden rush of air split the silence. A blade flashed from the mist. Watson twisted instinctively. Steel scraped his coat, grazing his side. A masked figure lunged, dagger gleaming eyes burning beneath the hood. Watson fired. The shot thundered. The figure staggered but did not fall. Holmes struck from the side, cane whipping against the attacker's wrist. The dagger clattered to the stones. In a flash, Holmes drove the brass handle into the man's throat, sending him sprawling against the wall. But before Watson could catch his breath, movement stirred in the mist. Two more figures emerged, cloaked and masked, blades glinting in the gaslight. The chamber, Watson gasped. Holmes's voice was iron. No, fragments of it. The true body remains in shadow. These are but hands reaching from the dark. The attackers advanced, silent, swift. Holmes's cane cracked against one's jaw, teeth and blood scattering. Watson fired again, his revolver's report echoing down the empty street. The second lunged, regardless, knife cutting across Watson's sleeve, tearing cloth and flesh dot. Watson cried out, stumbling, the codex satchel sliding from his shoulder. The masked man's eyes locked on it instantly. He reached Holmes, his dagger flashed. A single thrust, precise, beneath the ribs. The man froze, choking on his own blood, and collapsed upon the stones. The fog seemed to recoil with him. Silence bled back into the street. Watson clutched his arm, crimson seeping through torn fabric. Holmes knelt, retrieving the codex, his expression grim. "They want it," Watson muttered, teeth gritted. "They'll never stop until what?" Holmes interrupted, eyes blazing as he pressed the satchel back into Watson's hands. "Until prophecy swallows us. Until the book decides our fate." His voice shook with fury, but not at Watson. At the very air, at the words carved into his mind. Watson staggered, breath ragged. "Holmes, we cannot keep it." Perhaps Caro was right. Perhaps no man should. Holmes rose slowly, the bloody dagger still in his grip. He looked down at the dead men, their masks cracked, their faces slack in death. Then his gaze shifted to the fog, to the unseen eyes he knew lingered beyond. "No, Watson," he said coldly. "We cannot destroy it. Not yet. If we are to end the chamber, we must know it. And to know it, we must carry it, even if it damns us both." Watson met his eyes. For the first time he saw the shadow of the prophecy writ plain upon Holmes's face, not fear, but inevitability. The fog thickened, swallowing the corpses. Somewhere in the dark, a crow cawed, and from the mist came faint, mocking whispers. One shall betray the other. Holmes tightened his grip on the dagger, his voice low. "Let them whisper. We write our truth in blood, not ink." The fire in Baker Street hissed and spat, but gave no warmth. Watson sat in silence, his arm bound, the sting of the wound throbbing with every heartbeat. The codex lay open before him, though he swore he had not touched the clasp. Its pages moved in silence, as though stirred by an unseen breath. Each line of seared script shimmered faintly, then twisted, reshaping itself into words he could read. He blinked hard. No, it could not be. But the words remained. "Watson." His breath caught. He leaned closer. The letters burned brighter. "He will turn upon you. When the hour comes, he will choose the book. Over you." Watson slammed the codex shut, heart hammering, bile rising in his throat. He staggered to his feet, chair scraping across the floor. "Holmes," he barked, his voice unsteady. Holmes was in the corner, pale in the firelight, his violin drawn beneath his chin. He played no melody, only a single, low, quivering note that hung like a funeral dirge. His eyes were closed, face taut with some inner storm. Watson's voice cracked. "The book, it spoke my name. It told me." Holmes's eyes snapped open. "Enough." Watson froze. There was something in Holmes's stare he had never seen before, a depth of exhaustion, a tremor of obsession. Holmes lowered the violin slowly, his voice hoarse. "Watson, if you allow that book to plant its poison, then prophecy is already fulfilled. Do you understand? It thrives on suspicion. Doubt is its weapon." Watson clenched his fists. "And yet you keep it. You guard it like treasure, even when it rots us from within." The air thickened. For a moment, the fire dimmed. Both men stood in silence, their breath harsh, the prophecy's shadow pressing between them like a blade. Then came the knock, 3 times, slow, deliberate. Holmes moved first, crossing the room in silence. He opened the door to reveal the night fog, and a figure standing in its heart. It was not masked. It wore no hood. Instead, its face was covered in ash, streaked with lines of crimson paint. A man, tall, lean, draped in black cloth that whispered against the floor like wings. In his hands he carried no weapon, only a chain of bone beads, each one carved with symbols that gleamed faintly in the gaslight. "Mr. Holmes," the figure said, voice calm, almost kind. "Dr. Watson, I am sent to parley." Holmes's hand hovered near his dagger. "The chamber does not parley." The figure smiled faintly. "The chamber does not need to. It simply remembers. And so does the Codex. Already it tells you what we need not speak aloud." His eyes drifted toward Watson. "Already it sows the fracture." Watson's pulse quickened. He stepped back, revolver half drawn. "Say your piece and be gone." The emissary inclined his head slightly. "The Codex belongs to the chamber. Return it, and your bond may yet endure. Refuse." His gaze sharpened, voice lowering to a hiss. "And you will watch the prophecy carve itself upon your lives." Holmes stepped forward, voice sharp as steel. "If prophecy is truth, why send you here to bargain? Why not wait and let your precious Codex deliver us to ruin?" The emissary's smile did not falter, because sometimes prophecy needs only a nudge, a whisper, a seed planted. His eyes glimmered like embers as he turned them on Watson once more. "He doubts you already." Watson's chest constricted. He raised the revolver a fraction higher, hand trembling. "Get out," he spat. The emissary tilted his head, almost in pity. "The chamber thanks you for your guardianship. It will not be long before the Codex chooses its betrayer." And then he stepped backward into the fog. With each step, his form dissolved, until only the chain of beads clattered softly to the threshold. By the time Holmes stooped to seize it, the street was empty. Only the fog remained. Holmes held the chain up to the firelight. Each bead was carved with the same script as the Codex. He closed his hand tightly around it, jaw set. Watson's voice shook. "Holmes," he spoke the truth. "I do doubt. God help me, I cannot stop." Holmes met his eyes. His own voice was quiet, but hard as stone. "Then we fight not only them, Watson. We fight ourselves. And that is the war the chamber intends to win." The Codex pulsed faintly beneath its shroud, and from its depths came the faintest whisper, almost tender. "One shall betray the other." The day was dim, though the sun had not yet set. A bruised sky hung over Westminster, clouds swollen and low, dripping mist across the streets. Crowds thronged near the Houses of Parliament, umbrellas raised against the drizzle, boots clattering on wet stone. It should have been ordinary. Yet Watson felt unease coil in his gut like a serpent. The Codex weighed heavy in the satchel beneath his coat. Every jostle of the crowd seemed to push strangers closer, too close eyes, too curious. He caught glimpses of faces behind veils, hats lowered too far, mouths whispering words he could not hear. Holmes walked ahead, tall and austere, his cane tapping steadily upon the stones. Yet Watson noticed the way Holmes's eyes flickered, left-right, always calculating. "Why here?" Watson asked softly, keeping pace. Holmes's jaw was set. "Because the chamber does not kill in silence forever. They thrive on spectacle, on shadowing truth with terror. Watch." As if on cue, a sudden scream tore through the crowd. Umbrellas snapped aside. A man collapsed upon the steps, clutching his throat, blood spurting bright against the grey rain. Chaos erupted. People shoved, stumbled, voices rising in panic. Another man fell, then another. Both bore the same wound, a deep cut across the throat, as though sliced by a single invisible hand. "Holmes." Watson gasped, reaching for his revolver. Holmes's eyes locked on the rooftops. Through the fog and rain, he saw them cloaked figures, masks gleaming faintly, watching from above like vultures. One raised a hand, and in the chaos below, more blades struck. This was not murder. It was theatre. Down. Holmes shouted, dragging Watson into the shelter of a stone arch. The crowd surged like a stampede, cries of terror drowning in the patter of rain. Bodies sprawled across the steps, crimson mixing with water, washing down the cobbles in rivulets. And then silence. Sudden, terrible. The masked figures on the rooftops vanished, melting into the mist. All that remained was the echo of screams and the dead left behind. Throats carved in perfect symmetry. Watson's hand trembled on his revolver. Dear God. They did this only to speak. Holmes cut in, his voice cold. He pointed to the nearest body. Across the man's chest, carved with the same precision as the wounds, was a single line. Not with ink. With blood, return the codex, or London bleeds. Watson staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Around them, the crowd howled for the police, for help. Yet Holmes's eyes were fixed upon the words. Not the dead, not the cries. Only the message. This was no assassination, Holmes murmured. It was a sermon. Watson's face hardened. Then what are we to do, Holmes? We cannot fight an entire city haunted by shadows. Holmes's cane struck the stones sharply. We do what we must always do, Watson. We follow the shadow to its source, and if the chamber means to stain London with prophecy, then we drag prophecy into the light and choke it there. Yet even as he spoke, he could feel the codex pulsing faintly in the satchel, as though it approved, as though it whispered its hunger for blood yet to come. The drizzle thickened into rain. The bells of Westminster tolled, and somewhere beneath the din of the city, carried on the wind, came a familiar whisper, almost mocking. One shall betray the other. Holmes's jaw tightened. He glanced at Watson, who stood pale, shaken, revolver still in hand. For the first time, Holmes wondered if the prophecy's true theatre was not in crypts or streets, but in the bond between them, a bond now stretched thin by the chamber's cruel hand. The rain had not ceased for 3 days. London seemed drowned in it, the gutters swollen, the gas lamps weeping their glow through curtains of mist. Within 2 to 1B, Holmes moved like a phantom, restless, driven by something more than reason. Maps and ledgers littered the floor, newspapers pinned with needles upon the wall. Lines of string connecting murders to meetings, obscure dates to forgotten ruins. Watson stood near the fire, his arm still sore beneath its bandages. He watched Holmes pace, lips moving soundlessly, eyes blazing with that feverish light he knew too well, the light of obsession, of a mind that had ceased to sleep. Holmes, Watson said at last, voice edged with fatigue, you cannot continue like this. 3 nights without rest, and for what? To chase whispers. Holmes froze. Slowly he turned, eyes glinting sharp as daggers. Not whispers, Watson patterns. He stabbed a finger at the board, tracing the red threads. The assassinations at Westminster, not random. Each victim sat upon a subcommittee tied to the East India Company's archives. And these, he snatched a paper, thrusting it forward, these names, hidden in obituaries and bankruptcy notices, belonged to men who once owned fragments of a manuscript catalogued in 1796, a manuscript bound in the same vellum as our codex. Watson's blood chilled. You mean there are more? Holmes's voice dropped to a hiss. There were. Scattered, traded, lost in the underworld of antiquarians. The chamber's purpose has always been to collect them. What we hold is not a book, Watson. It is a piece, a single shard of a larger whole. The words fell like stones. Watson's throat tightened as his eyes drifted to the satchel by the desk, the codex pulsing faintly within. If it was but a fragment, then what horror might the whole contain? Holmes resumed pacing, his coat whipping like a shadow. But the chamber grows bold. The massacre was not simply a warning. It was a cleansing. They silence those who might reveal the trail of their acquisitions, which leaves only one thread uncut. He lifted a letter, sealed with cracked red wax. Its parchment was brittle, its ink faded. Watson recognized it, one of the documents seized from Caro's ruin before the crypt collapsed. The inner council, Holmes whispered. The men who guard the chamber's heart. Not cloaked assassins, not chanting thralls. Men of rank, men with influence enough to weave their cult into the very bones of empire. And this, he tapped the seal, names one among them. A financier in London, a patron of the East India Docks. Tonight, Watson, we hunt not in shadows, but in parlors, gilded with gold. Watson exhaled slowly, gripping the revolver at his hip. And if they await us? Holmes's smile was grim, humorless. Then the prophecy is not wrong, my friend. It is simply impatient. He swept his cloak about his shoulders, snatching his cane and dagger in one swift motion. The rain battered the window. The fog outside, alive with gaslight and gloom. Watson glanced once more at the codex, its whispers curling faintly at the edge of his hearing. One shall betray the other. He clenched his jaw, tore his gaze away, and followed Holmes into the storm. The streets swallowed them, two men walking into the labyrinth of empire, where wealth and corruption masked the pulse of something far older, far darker. And as they vanished into the fog, the codex lay behind, pulsing faintly, as if aware its hour drew closer. The carriage rattled through Belgravia, its wheels hissing over wet cobblestones. Gas lamps flickered against fog-drenched mansions, each towering behind iron gates, their windows glowing like watchful eyes. Watson, seated stiffly across from Holmes, tugged his collar higher. It is one thing to chase cutthroats in alleys, Holmes. Quite another to slip into the parlors of London's elite. Holmes adjusted his gloves with clinical precision. And yet, Watson, corruption most often wears velvet. The cutthroat merely performs what his master commands. Tonight, we seek the hand that guides the blade. The carriage halted before a grand residence, columns towering, windows draped in crimson silk. At the door, carriages lined in a neat row, disgorged men in fine coats and women in gowns heavy with jewels. But their faces, some hidden behind masks of bronze or silver, eyes glinting too cold for an evening ball. Watson's heart sank. Masquerade. Holmes's smile was razor-thin. How fitting. Inside, the air was perfumed and thick, a haze of incense masking the scent of wet wool and wine. A string quartet played softly in a corner, though their melody slipped often into dissonance, as if intentional. Guests moved in murmuring clusters, their laughter hollow, their masks gleaming under chandeliers of dripping wax. Holmes handed his cloak to a servant, leaning close to Watson. Observe. The music, the ritualized laughter. This is no ball. It is theatre, a veil upon conspiracy. The inner council gathers under the guise of society. They drifted through the hall, glasses pressed into their hands, though neither drank. Watson's pulse thudded in his ears, for every glance seemed sharper, every whisper tinged with menace. A silver-masked man brushed past, murmuring a phrase Watson could not catch, but Holmes did. His brow tightening. "It is Sanskrit," Holmes breathed. "A line from the Atharva Veda. Invocation to bind the soul to shadow." Watson gripped his revolver beneath his coat. "Holmes, we should..." Before he could finish, a gong resounded through the chamber, low and booming. Conversation ceased. The guests turned in unison, masks glinting like a sea of polished skulls. At the far end of the hall, tall doors creaked open. From the darkness beyond emerged a procession, men robed in black and crimson, their masks wrought into twisted visages of kings, saints, and beasts. At their center walked one man unmasked, tall, severe, his hair silver, his eyes hard as stone. He carried no emblem, no blade, only authority. Holmes whispered, voice taut with recognition. "Lord Halcroft." Watson stiffened. He knew the name. Banker, parliamentarian, patron of countless museums and expeditions. A man revered for his philanthropy. Yet here he stood, leading a council cloaked in blood red. Halcroft raised a hand. Silence deepened. "Brothers," his voice carried across the marble hall, smooth as oil, cold as iron. "The Codex speaks. The fragments converge. Already the world trembles at our hand. Kings fall, markets sway, nations bleed. And yet one page eludes us. A fragment stolen, hidden by fools who think themselves men of reason." His gaze swept the crowd, and for the briefest moment, Watson swore those eyes locked upon him. Holmes's hand brushed Watson's arm, steady but urgent. "Still, do not falter." Halcroft continued, "The Codex calls for unity, for sacrifice. Tonight, we bind its will to ours anew." At his signal, servants wheeled forth a marble altar, veiled in silk. The crowd pressed closer, whispering, masks glittering like carrion birds circling. The cloth was drawn aside. Upon the altar lay a body. A man bound in iron chains, his chest carved with symbols. Watson recognized all too well the same marks etched upon the victims at Westminster. The quartet's music died. Candles flickered violently. Watson's breath caught in his throat. Good God! Holmes's eyes narrowed, unflinching. This is the inner council's communion. They kill not for secrecy, Watson. They kill to feed the prophecy. As Halcroft lifted a blade of obsidian, the chamber echoed with low chanting. The masked congregation swayed, whispering the same refrain, "Return the Codex, or London bleeds." Watson's knuckles whitened on his revolver. His every instinct screamed to intervene, to stop the ritual, to save the chained man before the blade descended. Yet Holmes's hand held him fast, grip like steel. "Not yet," Holmes hissed. "Patience is survival. To reveal ourselves now is to die with him." The blade rose higher, gleaming black in the candlelight. Watson's heart hammered. Holcroft's voice rang out, "Tonight, the blood speaks for us all." The blade fell, and the chamber roared. The cry of the congregation still echoed when the blade was withdrawn. The chained man upon the altar had fallen still, his chest a ruin of carved sigils. Blood streamed into shallow grooves cut into the marble, winding like rivers across the altar to collect in a silver basin. The massed crowd pressed forward eagerly, dipping their gloved fingers into the crimson pool, tracing symbols upon their throats. A baptism in silence. Holmes and Watson lingered at the edge, their faces half-shadowed, feigning composure while their hearts thundered. Watson's breath hissed between clenched teeth. Holmes. We cannot simply stand by. Holmes's hand clamped over his wrist. Control yourself. One wrong move, and we become their next sermon. Halcroft lifted the basin, his voice rising above the whispering choir. Thus the codex is fed. Thus the prophecy breathes. And thus we prepare for the final night. Final night. The words throbbed in Watson's skull. He dared glance at Holmes, who stood frozen, eyes narrowed, every muscle taut as wire dart. Then, with a gesture, Halcroft dismissed the crowd. Some guests drifted away toward the ballroom, others through side passages hidden in the woodwork. Yet Halcroft and a select few robed figures retreated through a set of gilded doors at the rear. Holmes's lips moved soundlessly, now moving as shadows among shadows. Holmes guided Watson across the hall, slipping behind the retreating council. The gilded doors creaked open, revealing a narrow stair spiraling downward. They waited until the last robe had vanished below, then followed. Steps soundless upon the stone. The stair emptied into a chamber far older than the mansion above. Its walls were rough-hewn, damp with age. Torches burned in iron sconces, their smoke curling into carved sigils upon the ceiling. At the center of the chamber stood a round table, upon which the codex fragments lay open, their vellum pages spread like wings. A great map of London had been laid beside them, covered in markings, rivers, crypts, cathedrals. Watson's throat tightened. God help us. It's a blueprint. Holcroft's voice cut the air, low and resonant. When the fragments converge, London becomes the altar. The city's veins shall run red, its stones baptized. And from that flood, the chamber shall ascend beyond kings, beyond nations, beyond death itself. Another voice, thin and reedy, replied, and the missing fragment. Holcroft's eyes gleamed. We know where it lies. The fools think themselves unseen. But the codex hungers. It shall return to its kin, soon. Watson's pulse thundered. He shot Holmes a warning glance. The satchel at their side, if the chamber knew, if even a whisper betrayed them. Holmes pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence. Yet even he could not mask the tension in his jaw. Suddenly, a torch guttered. One of the robed figures turned sharply, eyes narrowing toward the shadows where Holmes and Watson crouched. Wait, the figure hissed. Did you hear that? The chamber fell silent. The council froze. Torches sputtered in the thick air, smoke curling into long, accusing fingers. Watson's grip tightened on his revolver. Sweat beaded his brow. One step, one flicker of light, and they would be exposed. Holcroft's gaze swept the chamber, cold, merciless. His hand reached slowly toward the hilt of the obsidian blade at his belt. Holmes leaned close to Watson, whispering so faintly it was almost breath. If we are seen, we fight. And if we fight, we do not stop. Every nerve screamed as boots scraped stone. A masked figure stepped nearer, nearer, torchlight edging closer to their hiding place. Watson's hand trembled on his weapon. Holmes's eyes burned, focused, ready. The figure leaned forward, and a sudden crash resounded from above, echoing down the stair. The servant's voice rang through the stone corridors. My lord, the constables. A raid. Chaos erupted. The inner council snarled, sweeping codex fragments from the table into iron chests. Halcroft's voice cut through the uproar. Seal the chamber. Nothing leaves this place alive. Holmes seized Watson's arm. Now. They darted from the shadows, slipping into the confusion. Shouts erupted behind them, robes flaring, torches blazing. The stair wound upward like a serpent, and behind them, the chamber howled with pursuit. The stair spiraled upward like the throat of a beast swallowing them whole. Behind, the roar of pursuit grew louder, boots hammering, robes flaring, torches spitting sparks. Faster, Watson. Holmes barked, his cane rapping stone with each stride. Watson's chest burned, lungs straining against the weight of smoke and panic. He clutched his revolver close, every step echoing with the knowledge that a dozen blades sought their backs. At last, the stair burst into a narrow corridor of carved oak, the mansion above trembling with shouts. Somewhere distant, windows shattered. Police whistles cut the night, Watson gasped. Holmes was that Scotland Yard. Holmes did not slow. Perhaps the council's diversion. Either way, we must vanish before law and cult both lay hands upon us. They slipped through a side hall lined with portraits, stern faces of judges, admirals, men of empire, yet Watson swore their painted eyes shifted, following him with cold judgment. Behind, footsteps thundered closer. A masked figure lunged from a side door, blade flashing. Watson fired. The shot cracked like thunder, echoing through the hall. The assassin spun, fell against the portraits, crimson staining their gilt frames. Keep moving. Holmes snapped, dragging Watson onward. They burst through a servant's door into the rear gardens. Rain lashed down, drenching hedges and gravel paths. Lanterns bobbed as robed figures spilled into the night. Cries of fury carried on the storm. Holmes darted toward a wrought iron gate, fingers working furiously at the lock. "Damnation," he hissed. "Rust." Watson spun, revolver raised. Shadows closed in, half seen between the hedges, blades catching the lantern glow. His heart pounded. Holmes. A hand seized him from behind. Watson spun, gun pressed to the stranger's chest. But before he fired, a voice rasped in his ear. "Quiet, fools, if you wish to live." The man was gaunt, cloaked, his eyes fevered. With a deft motion, he shoved a key into Holmes's hand. "This way. The council sense you already, but they will not bleed you tonight." "Not yet." Holmes's gaze pierced the stranger like a blade. "Who are you?" The man's lips curled into something between a sneer and a plea. A traitor, or perhaps only one who grew weary of serving shadows. "Ask me not here. Run." The lock gave way. The gate swung open. Holmes and Watson plunged into the storm-slick alleys beyond, their mysterious benefactor vanishing into the dark as swiftly as he'd appeared. For blocks they ran, the sounds of pursuit fading into the labyrinth of London's midnight streets. At last they collapsed beneath the dripping awning of an abandoned shop, breath ragged, rain coursing down their faces. Watson pressed a trembling hand to his chest. Holmes. What in God's name was he? Holmes's face was pale, unreadable, eyes burning with a fire Watson had seen only a few times before, when the game shifted from peril into something far deeper. "He was proof," Holmes whispered. "Proof that the chamber is not united, that within their council lies fracture, dissent. And dissent, Watson, is our only hope." From within his cloak, Holmes withdrew something small and cold, a token pressed into his palm by the stranger during their escape. A coin, ancient, its surface worn smooth, yet etched faintly upon it was the same sigil as the codex. Holmes turned it over once, then closed his fist. Rain drummed heavy on the awning, the city shivering in the storm. The chamber bleeds through London's veins, Holmes murmured. But if one vein collapses, the body falters. We have found our crack in their altar, Watson, and we shall drive it wide open. Yet even as he spoke, the codex pulsed faintly in Watson's satchel, its whispers rising once more, cruel and mocking. One shall betray the other. Watson's hands clenched. For the first time, he did not look at Holmes. The city was not asleep that night. From the spires of St. Paul's to the alleys of Whitechapel, a strange silence smothered London. The rain had ceased, yet the air carried a weight, as though the heavens themselves held their breath. Holmes and Watson moved swiftly along the river's edge, their cloaks whipping in the wind. Behind them, the city's lamps guttered, one by one, extinguished as though unseen hands drew a veil across the streets. The convergence, Holmes muttered, eyes fixed ahead. They mean to bind London as the altar. Every street, every stone, every drop of its blood shall serve their prophecy. Watson's grip tightened on the satchel at his side. Within, the codex pulsed, steady, eager, alive. Its whispers rose louder than ever, curling like smoke into his thoughts. Bring me to them. Bring me home. The ritual site lay before them, the ruins of an ancient Roman amphitheater, long buried beneath the city, its stones unearthed only by recent excavation. Torches blazed in a circle, casting jagged shadows against the crumbling arches, and there, at the heart, stood Lord Halcroft and the inner council. Dozens of cloaked figures formed a ring around a vast altar of black stone. Upon it lay fragments of the codex, spread like wings of a beast. Only one space remained empty, the final page. Still bound within Watson's satchel, Holcroft's voice boomed across the ruin. Tonight, London bleeds, not in pieces, but as one. The codex shall be made whole, and through its truth we ascend beyond death. The congregation roared, their chant rising like a storm. Watson's chest tightened. His hand hovered over the satchel. The codex throbbed like a heartbeat, insistent, demanding. Holmes turned sharply to him, eyes burning. Watson, listen to me. You must not surrender it. Whatever happens, you must resist. Watson met his gaze, and for the first time doubt flickered between them. And if I cannot? Holmes's jaw clenched. Then prophecy triumphs. The council advanced, torches raised. Figures surged forward, hands grasping, blades flashing. Holmes and Watson fought fiercely, revolver and cane cracking skull and steel. Yet the tide pressed inexorable. Halcroft's voice cut the air. Give us the page, and we spare your city. The words struck Watson like a hammer. He saw the faces of London in his mind. The children in Whitechapel, the families by the docks, the soldiers in barracks. Innocents, all poised above the abyss. The codex whispered, one sacrifice saves thousands. One betrayal saves all. Holmes seized Watson's arm, his grip iron. No, Watson. It is lies. It feeds on fear. Do you not see? Betrayal is the altar. You deliver it, and prophecy fulfills itself. Watson trembled, torn between the voice of his friend and the call of the book. The chanting rose higher, thunder rolling above the ruins. And then, with a cry half anguish, half fury, Watson hurled the satchel into the flames of the altar. The codex screamed, not in words, not in sound, but in a vibration that shook the bones of all who stood there. The fragments upon the altar convulsed, pages tearing free, ink bleeding into the stone. A pillar of black fire roared skyward, devouring torch and sky alike. The council fell to their knees, chanting in ecstasy. Halcroft stretched his arms wide, bathed in the unnatural light, but Holmes stood rigid, eyes locked on Watson. "You fool," he whispered. "You've given it what it sought." The prophecy echoed through the ruin. One shall betray the other. Watson staggered back, horror dawning as he realized. Not betrayal to the chamber, not betrayal to the city. The betrayal of Holmes himself. The altar cracked. The fire howled. From the stone rose shapes, shadows of kings, assassins, martyrs, all bound in chains of ink and blood. The Codex had birthed them, a legion of the dead screaming their eternal sermon. Holmes acted with brutal swiftness. He seized the obsidian blade torn from a fallen councilman and drove it deep into the altar's heart. A blinding flash tore the night. The ruins shook, stone collapsing, fire twisting upon itself. The shadows screamed as they were swallowed back into the Codex's pages, torn from the air like leaves in a storm. The book convulsed, then split apart, its vellum shattering like brittle glass. Silence.ash drifted upon the ruins, glowing faintly like dying stars. The council lay scattered, many crushed beneath stone, others fleeing into the labyrinth of tunnels. Halcroft himself was gone, swallowed by the collapse. Watson rose slowly, chest heaving, ears ringing from the blast. He turned to Holmes. Holmes stood with his back to him, shoulders rigid, the broken dagger still clenched in his hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold as the grave. "The Codex is ended, but so too is our trust." Watson faltered, words catching in his throat. Holmes turned, eyes dark, unreadable. "Prophecy was never written in the book, Watson. It was written in us, and you have proved it true." The rain began to fall again, soft, relentless, washing the ash into the Thames below. Two men stood amid ruins, one betrayed, one betrayer, yet both alive, both forever changed. The city breathed once more, saved from its altar. But between Holmes and Watson, something sacred had been broken, and in the distance, faint as mist, the whisper lingered still. Shadows never die. They wait,